Hey guys, this will be video 6 for the Les Paul restoration. I'm going to try to keep this under 15 minutes, 20 minutes, but this is going to be a pretty long video. It's going to be fairly detailed in relation to the routing jig that I built to pull all this stuff off, or pull this work off, as well as I'm going to reference some of the past videos where I talked about the initial inspections and what I'm looking for, things that I felt like I failed to mention, or my reasoning for why I do certain things when I'm assessing a project that I'm getting ready to, put under the chisel. So in reference to, I think it was video 3 where I mentioned I pull them out and I start tapping and I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. I'm basically looking for the what if scenarios, and I'm going to try not to revert back to talking about if this had been all intact or if this had not have been intact. The short answer is it's not. Okay, it's not there, so there's no reason to revisit that. And once we do realize what we're working with, then we make our decisions accordingly. But one thing I failed to mention was one of the first things I wanted to do after I got the top removed. I wanted to check for warpage, be it warpage on this plane, convex or concave, or warpage on the straight line axis, or God forbid, a twist. That would be a totally different scenario. And it spooked me at first when I put this on the table. It kind of, I thought, oh man, it's warped. But the back has a little bit of a carve. It gets a little bit thinner out at the edges than it is in the middle. And that's kind of interesting because I thought that the Les Paul was perfectly flat. But it appears that it has a little bit of a belly. So that's I'm a little bit too close. So it appears it has a little bit of a belly right there, which is kind of cool. And I verified that it wasn't just a warped body. It's not, because this plane was perfectly straight. Other than you can see out here when the router went across this, it did kiss that a little bit. So it might have had just a very small amount of warpage because there wasn't anything left on this side to hold it intact. The second thing that I probably might have confused some people with the whole neck angle thing, and I'm not going to spend any time talking about the neck in this video other than just how it relates to the body. But when I mentioned the pitch and the angle, the 4.5 degrees, and that created a certain height out here, what I did fail to mention was some of my first guitars that I restored, and I'm talking, I had a 1956 Gretsch Silverjet, very rare guitar, and even one that I took up to Gruen and showed to George, and it was kind of comical because he looked at me and he was like, I hope you didn't pay very much for this. But nonetheless, I sold that guitar for close to $7,500 after the restoration, and it's living in Australia. But where I'm going with this, the Gretsch has a very thick neck overhang right there, and it's even a dovetail joint. Changes everything, because with the Gretsch, and I'm not going to start talking about Gretsch, but I am going to talk about what if you wanted to buy this guitar and put a Bigsby on it. Okay, now we're in Neil Young territory. The Gretsch bridge has the bass. Everything's higher on the Gretsch, dramatically higher. We're talking 3/8 to a 1/2 inch higher. And that's why I made that statement. I was shocked that it was 5/8 of an inch. I thought it would be lower. And bear with me while I kind of set this up. Probably not getting a very good camera view. But when I began to realize that the bridge was, 5/8 of an inch thick, roughly, right at the height from the top to the plane of the frets, as I already clarified. The bottom of the strings are going to be near 3/4 of an inch. That's pretty high on a small body arch type guitar. So on that note, we're not that this owner wants to, but you're probably capable of putting a B3 on there rather than a B7. And I'm not going to go into explaining what I'm talking about there. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, then you're not really into Bigsby's anyway. But if you do understand why I just mentioned that, you'll know that the B3, which is the little brother to the B6, and I'm holding a B6, a vintage B6 right here. We're talking about this height right here across that bridge. When the neck speaking length comes up here and lands on the saddles, how much of a pitch down do we have in order to keep it from buzzing? And that's why I'm saying probably could get away with a B3 on this Les Paul rather than a B7, which has the hold down bar. And I think that's probably more information than most guys want. But again, as I mentioned early in this series, this is for guys who are wanting to build a Les Paul. And some of us like a Bigsby, some of us don't. Some of us want a hardtail. I'm in hardtail territory with this one, and I'm going to stay in that territory. I'm not going to do anything to make changes so it will handle a B3. If anything, I'm going to be talking to the owner about dropping that 5/8 inch down to 9/16. And there's ways I can do that with the neck angle later on. So anyway, makes them feel much cleaner as well. So I talked about the string heights and all that jazz, the thicknesses, and I mentioned I'll go into extreme detail when I start talking about the necks later on. So I don't continue talking about the neck. I'm just going to pull it off, get it out of the way. One thing I ran across that was pretty interesting, and I apologize if I had bad camera work. I was looking at the video. You can see right here, when I pulled the tailpiece studs out, the wood was rotted really bad, and I guess it was from the rust and all the moisture from 40 years of just general moisture in the air got to the mahogany. And was it an issue? Was it a tuning stability issue? Probably not, because it was so deep down into the body. But did it affect the tone? Yes, it did. And I can attest to that just from knowing about how, building guitar. Well, I will talk about this. The studs in like a 59 or a early 60s Les Paul, they just were fastened directly into the body. They didn't sit in the anchors as we know today. I should be pointing up here. So when you got these anchors back here, if the wood around that anchor is only at 70%, then the tone is only traveling through the good wood areas. And if you got string tension, is that anchor moving slightly? So now we know that the anchor's not going to move. It's going to be a more assurance, or there's going to be more assurance that you're going to have better tuning stability, rather than had we have been real ginger about this restoration and said, oh, don't get into the anchors, just stay away from that. No, you got to go in there. You need to go in there and find out what's going on below, because this gave me the opportunity to take and spend 35 minutes putting a mahogany block in there. So I think that makes sense. So that once all of the other wood gets put in place, now that's protected. Now you're probably thinking, well, what about all these gaps in here? Well, once this is all put back together, and then I do put it on the drill press to re-drill these, every bit of the machine work will now be brand new. All the wood will be brand new. If there's any epoxy in there, it'll be filling those voids, and there won't be any loose areas or weak areas is where I'm going as well. All right, so the maple. Let me grab these, and this is where I've already clarified how I was going to fit this back together, and how it's going to go together, and how everything will fit. So I'll just kind of step back and take a wide view, and you can kind of see. It's hard to tell. I got this on the tall table as well. Let me see if I can get this light on. And let me make sure it's pressed up in there. The joints turned out very good. Are they perfect? No. They're probably a 9 out of 10. In a few spots, it's a 10 out of 10, but that's why you'll see why I like using the T88. It fills those voids and dries very hard, whereas the white glue, any white glues, Type Bonds, Elmer's, you name it, it would leave a rubbery soft spot. So I'm kind of giving away my reasoning for using the T88, but I think we need to start talking about some of that stuff. So let me talk about fitment here. And I mentioned how this can be done in 3 different jobs, 4 different jobs. Job 1 being the tear out, job 2, and see, I've got this line right here. When I mentioned this dark line, that was a line that I drew on with a pen. That wasn't a body glue line. So for those guys that might not have understood what I was talking about, but this being a 3-piece body, this line here, I'm sorry about the camera, I'm looking over it sometimes, and sometimes I'm looking through the camera, but this line here now continues with the original glue up line of the upper plank to the middle plank. Now this piece, again, you know, I think you understand that's beveled, that's cut on a 14-degree angle. That's already planed on a 14-degree angle. Sorry, let me get the light over here. So that's on a 14-degree angle. Now this, okay, perfect example of what I was talking about earlier. See all that kind of, I'll call it scrap blocking, even though it's not. This comes in, boom, and if you look straight down, let me make sure I got everything lined up. Look down in there, I don't think it's going to show. Well, if you look down in there, there's a lot of maple because it's on an angle, and that'll all get drilled out. Okay, now this is where it's going to get really interesting, and it's going on right here as well, but I'm not going to talk about it because it'll get extremely boring and kind of confusing. Yes, this is 14 degrees. This is a 14-degree bevel. Just as that's a 14 degree, 14 degree, 14 degree, and then guess what starts happening right here and right here. You have to start pitching the bevel up in a compound fashion so that it will now be a 90-degree turn once you get to this point. Because I didn't bevel these pieces. These are straight up and down. So in other words, it's a compound bevel as it comes out of the cut and meets. I need a helper. As it comes out of that point right there and meets this point, it's now 90 degrees. These two are just butting together. There's no bevel between that plank, that plank, that plank. All the bevel work is done up in the body. Now you're thinking, how in the world could you map that out and make it work? You start with paper. You start with your template, and I'm not going to explain how this is done. If you don't know how this is done, then we're probably going to start getting over your head. But basically, you put the paper up there, and then you start making pencil marks, and then you start trimming off the pencil lines until you achieve the radius. Now you're thinking, man, how in the world did you get the perfectly round radius? And where I'm going this, before I get to the jig, I take that radius right there and transfer it to the back of the maple. See what I'm saying? Transfer it up into that corner right there. Draw the pencil line, and then jigsaw or bandsaw that off, and then start doing the beveling. And that's a 45-minute explanation right there, but that's how you get a beautiful, precise, very strong joint. And then I don't think there's any reason, well, to talk about that other than this is pretty important. Why did I cut out so much material here? So that when you flip this baby over, okay, Okay, when you flip the guitar over and you look into the cavity, guess what you see? You see beautiful maple, and you see hard maple that matches the original body. And you might even be asking, where did this maple come from? This maple came from my dad's miter box. You know how you buy the little miter box from the hardware store in the 70s? Well, that's what this was. So this maple is about 50 years old, if not 48, something. It's in the 40s range. So we got our old maple back. And when you roll this baby over, someone would be really hard pressed to even know. Oh yeah, okay, this worked better than I thought. I was afraid it wasn't going to marry up. So when you look in that cavity, very nice, very clean. Is it new? Has it been renovated? You'd have to really know what you were doing by the time all the overspray gets in there and the lacquer, or it could even be aged with tint. There's a million things I could do where 9 times out of 10 you would open that cavity and you wouldn't even realize the top had been replaced. So that's enough said about that. How did I do that? Bear with me, the camera's gonna get a little shaky here. Okay, sorry about the setup, but best I can do. All right, the whole idea is this. I gotta take this bit, a dovetail bit that needs to be, first off, they're very dangerous to work with, but because they grab and pull very dangerously. Not so much for hurting yourself, but damaging your project. I got to figure out how to take this dovetail bit and run it around that corner, and which direction path should I follow? Should I follow from this path or from this direction? I'm not going to get into that because anybody who knows how to use a router knows which direction to follow, and you need to move from this direction around there. So I'm trying to figure out how to get that router bit, which does not have a ball bearing on it, and I'm not going to spend 4 or 5 hours building a jig and offset for the ball bearing, but I made this jig. Let's get the light out of the way. See, it's just a half round, but then it has a bit of a leg on the left and on the right, so that oh, this is gonna be hard because I didn't realize how high the table is. I should have had this on a lower table. Basically, I'm gonna have it set like that right there. Okay, and I apologize, I should have spent a little bit more time setting up and preparing for this video, but then I can reach over here with the clamp and clamp that into place, and then my router bit comes in from this side, and the shank, I'm only using the shank to ride against the side of the jig. I don't need a bearing. It's not like I'm cutting 50 of these. I'm only cutting one, and then I follow that path right there until I make the cut. Is that a one cut pass? Hell no, absolutely not. You back out back here and you start cutting in. You make one pass, you release your clamp, move it in, make another pass, take about 1/8 of an inch, release the clamp, move it in, make another pass. I think I made like 7 passes on this, and I even got to the point where I was like, well, I'm going to go over to the right a little bit because I want to make sure that this corner doesn't end up encroaching on that piece of wood. When this baby ends, I want it to end right at, this is called in the architectural millwork industry, this is called the spring line of the arch. Like if you had a cased opening or a half round top door, that the door leg goes up or the window leg goes up, and then when it hits that point, when it starts turning into a radius, that's called the spring. I wanted that spring point to make sure that it stopped before it encroached on that center plank. And I think anybody would understand what I mean by that. That's pretty straightforward. So, but unless you think through your project, if you just bolted this jig up in here and started routing, you might miss it by 1/8 of an inch, just enough to make a mistake, and you end up coming out. You come out to the right side of your tailpiece, and that would have been a mistake. We don't want that. So I think that's making sense. So anyway, take the time, build the jig, makes the job easier, guarantees that you get a really pretty radius there, and it turned out well. I'm happy with it. And by the time they glue in place, it should be good. I'm going to take a quick look at my notes here. The only thing I didn't mention was gravity and glue. When I did all this epoxy work here, I mentioned prying that top open. I'm going to go ahead and talk about this briefly. The top did not break. It's separated from the body. So what I did was control it by prying it open and then sticking just the thickness of this little pick tool in there and holding everything open. See, if you remember in the first video, this was already loose. It's not like I cut all the wood out. This was already loose and bowing away from the guitar, good Lord, by over 1/16 of an inch, 2 millimeters of an inch or so, approximately 2 millimeters. So I just pried that open about 1/4 of an inch, and then pried this open about 1/8 of an inch. Then I mixed up my epoxy, and I shoved the epoxy in there. After I ran that saw across this way, then I ran the epoxy in from this angle right here and made sure that all the epoxy was pushed up to the point. And then I'd pull a wedge out, and I'd press down a little bit and see if I had any squeeze out, because I didn't want to have too much epoxy in there. And then if it wasn't squeezing out in here in this on this back wall, then I put a little more epoxy, and I kept working that epoxy and even sliding in and around, and I don't mean to make you seasick, but I made sure that every bit of that was covered extremely well, so that once I did come in with the C-clamp in the middle and probably put no more than 10 pounds of pressure on it, when it closed up, all of the epoxy just started slowly easing out, and it was so incredible because I wasn't working within a 15-minute window of Titebond tacking on me so quickly that it ended up becoming a rubber gasket. Okay, I'm giving away the whole T88 thing again, but I'm trying to assure that, you know, I got a real hard, brittle surface once it, I don't mean brittle meaning weak, but for tone transference, I want to make sure that I had just enough epoxy to hold it together, but not so much that I created a rubbery gasket like could have happened with like a white glue or something like that. That was the importance of the initial saw cut, the relief, feeding the epoxy in, etc., etc. And I know probably most of you guys have checked out by now or glazed over, but this is the extremely boring crap that you have to assess or address on the very front end to make sure that you don't end up with what I call a beautiful disaster. Yeah, who gives a shit about the paint? Who cares? You know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how beautiful and shiny it is if it's only connected, you know, in 40% of the top. We got to make sure this top is as well connected today as it was 40 years ago, and the work that we do today should be just as strong 40 years from now as it was, etc., etc., etc. So that's where I went with that. Now that's boring to most of you guys, but it's critical and very important. That T88 epoxy, I forgot to mention, I get that from a company called Aircraft Spruce and Specialty Company. They have offices, or they have shops all over the country. I think they have 5 or 6 shops, shipping destinations. This came out of Georgia. Not really going to talk about the order of operations other than I made a note. It's okay to not know. Each project will require a different approach. That's kind of what I meant by, in my first video, if you watch the first video, you would probably think, yeah, he's going to pull the top. He's just going to jerk the top off and do a brand new top. So what I meant by that was, it's okay to not know. It's okay to even start the renovation and not know exactly what you're going to do, or when you're going to do it, or whether you're even going to just box the thing back up and send it back to the client and go, look, man, I could have cut my grass. You know, I got other things I need to do. Or I could have built 2 other guitars by the time I fixed the top on this one. And you have to be willing to step into a project and start assessing, you know, how much can I pull off for a fair amount of money, not cheap, but just, you know, how can I do this and keep it under control? And that's why in some of the first few videos, I really didn't know. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I know exactly what I'm going to do now. And I didn't clarify that I'm not about to glue all this maple down either, because that would be ignorant. When I have so much more machine work to do right here, and I don't want my nice maple either risking damage. Imagine having that piece of maple in there, and you drop a tool or a drill, and then you put a dent in it or something like that. So your order of operations are pretty critical, that you work in that up to that point, then stop. Take those pieces, lay them over in the corner, know that they're done, and move to the second phase of the project. This is turning into an extremely long video, but I don't feel like it's going to be wasted information, and I don't think it's going to cause anybody to fall asleep or their eyes to glaze over. So we'll see. I mentioned pausing the top work and moving to the lower bout restoration. I'm not really going to talk about Honduran mahogany versus Sapele versus African, quarter sawn versus plain sawn versus roof sawn. If you want to do some research, take those 5 or 6 points right there, and study it if you want to, and you'll find that there are tonal differences between quarter versus plain versus rift, and structural differences and things like that. This guitar appears to be mostly quarter because it's painted. I can't really tell for certain, but I'm pretty sure this is a quarter sawn body, meaning that the grains, the annular rings, are like this, rather than across this way. But I'll be the first to admit, mahogany is really difficult to read the grain, because here's a perfect example. Here's a piece of mahogany. This is Honduran. Anybody want to tell me where the end is and where the side is? You know, there's the top, and here's the bottom. Yeah, okay, see the grain? See how the grain's running that way? But it's almost impossible to tell that that would be the end grain and this would be the side. It's amazing. Now, I'm not saying that when I put this bottom back together that I'm going to get the grain off. The grains, that's just a sample, but the grain of the repair that I make will be in line with these grains here, and not crisscrossed or anything like that. So anyway, I don't think there's anything else I can talk about the body, and I don't feel like I missed anything that was critical from a carpenter's standpoint, or from a craftsman's standpoint. This video is probably not for the guitar player. This video is for the guy that's trying to figure out how to take a 1956 my favorite guitar, whatever, fill in that parentheses, and not F it up. You know, and I've seen some horrific situations where guys have taken guitars and they had no business whatsoever doing the renovation. And I'll shoot straight with you. I got lucky with my 56 Gretsch. I was in over my head when I started that, and I almost messed it up in hindsight. There were a few things that I did as far as rejoining the neck that weren't structurally wrong, but didn't need to be done. And I was approaching it from a standpoint of like a contractor, where I used to renovate historical structures, buildings and houses and stuff, and I should have been studying the Robert Benedetto videos. So anyway, we're close to 30 minutes. I so appreciate you guys staying in the ring with me on this one. From here on out, now that I've covered this stuff, I won't have to talk about anything structural, uh, pitches, angles, grains, etc., and I can just move forward to gluing things back together and shaping curvatures, and from here on out it's going to start getting really pretty. So might do one more video today talking about the extreme details of the neck, but probably not. I'm just going to start doing some of the initial prep work for repairing the lower bout. So again, thanks. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll do what I can to help out. Take care.